About a week ago I heard that Rick Dickinson had died. Now that's not a name that most of you will remember. He's not famous in the normal sense. He's actually the designer of the ZX Spectrum computer. This was the very first computer that I ever owned back in 1983. It was released in 1982. It has these strange rubber keys that were known as they were called a dead flesh keyboard. It's supposed to feel like dead flesh, but I have no idea what dead flesh actually feels like. So Rick Dickinson died. He's also the designer of the ZX Spectrum Next, which is the brand new iteration of this computer that is being released at the moment. I'm a supporter of the Kickstarter for that, so I'm expecting one of those computers in the post in the next month or two. I'm personally experiencing a bit of a ZX Spectrum renaissance at the minute. I've been buying books about how to program in machine code. I created a game a little while ago on the Spectrum, a conversion of a PC game called Knights, and I released it just into the fan scene. I'll put a link to it down below actually if anybody wants to download it and play it in an emulator. So I'm really enthusiastic about it. It is a return to childhood to an extent, but it's nice that there's this thriving community still. If anything, it's probably better now than it was in the past due to this new computer that's coming out, the Spectrum Next. It's a very exciting time actually just to be into old retro computer hardware. I'm learning Z80 assembly language because it appeals to the puzzle solver in me. It was something that was a real mystery to me back as a kid, as an 11-year-old, 12-year-old using one of these computers. I remember the feeling was that I was born at exactly the right time. It was just, if I'd been born a little bit earlier when computers weren't around, I'm not sure what I would have done, but computers were just the perfect fit for my mentality and my kind of just whatever way my brain was wired. It was just a perfect fit for me. So I was right there at the beginning of the computer era, and I feel privileged to have been there for that. Now, the person who introduced me to computers was my Uncle Maurice McCann, and on the very same day that I heard about Rick Dickinson's death, I heard about my uncle's death. He was the only person that I knew in the beginning who owned one of these, and it was through him that I first saw it, through him that I first became enthusiastic about it and demanded that I had one of these things as my 1983 Christmas present. And it really shaped the rest of my life. I'm employed in computers, and I've always known that I was going to be employed in computers. It was my primary subject, in my GCSEs and A levels, and then I went on to university and got a higher national diploma in computers. So it's always been my thing, and it continues to be so. And that all began with Maurice, my uncle. So he was on holiday with my aunt Heather, and they were, as far as I know, they were on the plane on the way home when he had a heart attack and died, and the plane was diverted to Italy. They had to land, and there had to be some kind of investigation. What's really interesting actually, just purely as a side note, but very interesting to regular subscribers who know the kinds of things that I talk about, particularly religious criticism. On the plane, my aunt was helped by a Muslim man and woman, and whenever the flight was diverted to Italy, the woman stayed behind with my aunt to help her while the woman's husband went home. So she stayed there, and it was, I really felt for my aunt because I was thinking at the time she'd be on her own dealing with all this, but she wasn't on her own. She had this Muslim lady to help her. And the woman is from Belfast, so that's like 25 miles away. So I guess they were able to fly back here together, and I got to meet her briefly at the funeral. So I just thought it was interesting, for once. Maybe not what you'd call a positive story about Islam, but it does somewhat colour the very dark picture I have in my mind about Islam and about Muslim people. It wasn't a Christian who stepped in, it wasn't an atheist who stepped in, it was a Muslim woman. I mean, that's really quite something. I don't think I would have done that if I had just been a stranger to that woman, my aunt, on the flight. I think I would just have tried to help possibly, but when it came time for my plane to take off again, I would have been on it. I wouldn't have been staying with her. Something to be learned from that, I guess. So I'll miss my uncle. Of all the people in my family circle, he was the one as a child who was my primary role model, because he was my one relative who was fun. He always had this kind of boyishness about him, and he had a great sense of humour. And he was into all kinds of things that to me as a boy were so much fun, not just the computers, but at the time he was into collecting train sets and things like that. And I remember regularly my mum would take me to visit my granny across town on a Thursday evening, and I would always run up to Maurice's house and spend time with him. It became a thing. And he owned a car. It was just a Ford Escort, but it was the same colour as the General Lee car from the Dukes of Hazzard, and he even had the Confederate number plate. He didn't have the big Confederate flag on the roof, but he had a Confederate number plate, and the car was fitted with a special horn that came out with that little tune that the one in the TV program plays, and so he was a fan of the program. And I can remember when he would visit our house, every time he would leave, we would have to stand at the door, and as he was driving away, he had to doot the horn and play that tune. Just simple things like that, you remember in people. Not big dramatic things, just these little simple things that colour a person's childhood. He tells the story as well of how, I don't remember this, but he had one of these little toy guns. I don't know if you remember these, but they have a little projectile with a sucker on the end of it. And he asked me to go and stand, I don't know what age I was because I don't remember this. He asked me to go and stand over by the door. And then he fired it at me, intending to just hit the door beside me. But he hit me right in the forehead. And my aunt was all, Heather's gonna, or my aunt was all, Daryl's mum's gonna kill you, and this sort of thing. I don't remember that though, but apparently that happened. And I'd sometimes go to car boot sales with him, and I'd be on the lookout for old electronic games and things. Actually, that's one that he gave me some time ago. Tomitronic 3D Sky Attack. Yeah, it still works. It's one of those little 3D things. Left, right, fire. It's actually very much like Tron, but who needs Oculus Rift, eh? Or PlayStation VR. But the one other memory that stands out of my uncle is being who he was. He was the first person I knew who owned a video cassette recorder, VCR. Now obsolete technology, of course, but back then, brand new thing. This would have been in the late 1970s or very early 80s, and I can't remember whether this was at his house or my house, but he had the video cassette recorder, and he had a movie on tape called Horror Express starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee and Telly Savalas. And it's about this train going through the icy Siberian wilderness. And on the train is a crate containing some kind of creature that has been dug out of the ice. And as the train travels, the ice gradually melts. And people get curious about this crate, so they go in and they open up the little door, tiny little window, and look in. And the creature is alive, and it had these big red eyes, and when it would look at you, it would turn you blind, and your eyes would go totally white, and you'd fall over dead. It scared the life out of me as a kid, and it's my first, I suppose, I wouldn't call it traumatic memory, but I don't think I watched that movie until I was like about 15 or 16. It frightened me so much. And then of course when I did bring myself to watch it, it was like, big deal. But as a 5 or 6 year old, it's one of my earliest memories, if not my earliest memory, me seeing this thing and running out of the living room screaming my head off. Much to my uncle's amusement, I'm sure. So I will miss him. I'll miss him very much. Alright folks, just a little anecdote from my personal life. Take care.